for food for thought. Please note, if you have any questions during the program, feel free to write them in the chat. We'll have Q&As at the end. Today, we have with us Team Silvinski. Team has worked at Congregation Mikveh Israel for 2.5 years as a learning and engagement coordinator. Thank you, team, for joining us today.
Ready? Okay, let's go. Well, we're here to talk. Well, good afternoon, first of all, everybody, on this beautiful, beautiful Thursday afternoon. If you've not been outside, please take a chance to step outside at some point and enjoy this beautiful day. It's an early taste of spring. We probably still have some chilly weather to go, but you know what? If you can get out a little bit today, take a walk around the block, whatever you can do. It'll be kind of an intro to Purim, which begins this evening. So we're here to talk about Purim, and we all kind of know the basics and we know the story. I'm here to share with you maybe some slightly odd facts that maybe you don't know about Purim. But let's just talk about the mystery of Purim first. It has actually been referred to by scholars, Jewish scholars, as perhaps the most mysterious of all Jewish holidays. It sort of suddenly appeared, and this was in the 2nd century BCE. So we're going back a ways, a little bit older than me. It's actually the year 124 BCE is the very first, earliest record that we have of any kind of a Purim celebration. But it was kind of ignored by the majority of Jews for many centuries following that. It did not become a major celebration in the Jewish community. To even add more to the mystery of Purim, the origins of the book of Esther, upon, of course, which our holiday is based, are very much shrouded in mystery as well. So we do have this sense of mystery about Purim. Now, there is a reference to a celebration of Purim in the 2nd book of Maccabees. Interestingly enough, that is a book which was not canonized into our Tanakh, but was canonized, interesting, in the Roman Catholic Bible. So while it is not a canonized book in our Jewish scripture, it is in the Roman Catholic scripture. Now, they set the date for celebrations of Purim at the 14th day of Adar. Why? Why was that date selected? Why was that date chosen? Well, legend tells us that that was supposedly the date of the execution for the Jews of Persia. So hence, that is the date for the celebration of Purim. Now, a bit later on, Josephus, who is the renowned Jewish historian, he does mention Purim in the 1st century of the Common Era. So we're seeing it come up a little bit more at that point. Then, none other than the Talmud, and we of course know the Talmud makes reference to sages and to rabbis who doubted whether Purim should even be celebrated as a Jewish holiday. So it was still questionable. Some believe, and again, this is some, not everybody, but some believe that the story of Queen Esther was actually a retelling of a story from either Greek, Persian, or Babylonian folktales. But even that has no verifiable proof. So we still have this mystery. It really wasn't until the Middle Ages, so we're moving forward ahead many, many hundreds of years. The Middle Ages is when the holiday became widely celebrated in Jewish communities. Now, while we all know the basic storyline of this holiday, I would hope, and we all know how we celebrate it today, how our modern celebration of Purims, with Purim spiels and Purim carnivals. Of course, back in the day when we could all get together and we could do these things and we would gather for Purim spiels in our communities, Purim carnivals, children would have little Purim dress-up parties and parades and things. Unfortunately, with COVID and our pandemic, a lot of that we're having to do like we're doing right now in a Zoom sort of setting, which of course is great, modern technology, great, but it's a lot more fun when you can kind of share the celebration, one-on-one with your friends, your family, or your community, your synagogue community, whatever. But I've managed to unearth, I love oddball things. In my life, I love to find sort of oddball things, whatever I'm researching. So I dug into some research on Purim, and I was able to unearth in my research 20 interesting facts or 20 interesting tidbits, if you will, about the holiday. Some of these you may know, maybe you've heard them before, and some of these may surprise you. They may be some of these tidbits or facts that you've never heard before. And therefore, if you find yourself on Jeopardy at some point and there's a Purim category, you might be able to answer, the big money question. I've often felt that we should have our own Jewish, because there's so much interesting knowledge out there in Jewish history and our celebrations and all of that, that we should have sort of a Jewish Jeopardy. If anybody wants to help me with that, that would be kind of a fun thing I think that we could do as a Savannah Jewish community. So here we go. Let's take interesting fact number 1 about Purim. So interesting fact number 1, God is never mentioned anywhere in the scroll of Esther. So you can read the whole Megillah, so to speak, and you are never going to see God's name come up at all, anywhere in the Megillah. Now, it's not that God isn't there, but God is more alluded to, never specifically mentioned. God is at work, of course, throughout the story, but the working of God is less obvious or less widely apparent. So interestingly enough, it is one of those cases where God's name never comes up. A lot of people didn't know that. I'll be honest, I didn't know that. So that was an interesting fact to me. So that's interesting fact on Purim number 1. Number 2, if we are looking at the Hasmonean dynasty, taking us back to our celebration of Hanukkah, this is, of course, the dynasty of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Actually, what we call Purim today, and I should start by saying the word Purim actually means lots. Lots as in like dice games, where you're gambling, and so that's where we get the name of the holiday today. But during the time period of the Second Temple, the Hasmonean dynasty, this day was actually known as the Day of Mordecai. So they did not call the celebration Purim back then, but instead they referred, what we call Purim celebrations, they referred to them as we are celebrating the Day of Mordecai. So clearly there's been a shift in how we refer to the holiday. Interesting tidbit or interesting factoid number 3. Historians, biblical scholars, Torah scholars, people who study these things very, very much in depth, have said that there is no record at all of the story of Esther anywhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they found no connection to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this leads a lot of biblical scholars, Torah scholars, a lot of our historians to doubt the canonical stature of the story of Esther. And I think that's why for many, many years, it was sort of not celebrated as a major holiday, where people did not really commemorate this story, because there is this doubt out there as to the canonical stature of the story of Esther. But nowhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls is there any mention or any reference to Queen Esther or the story that we know is the story of Purim today. Now, let's say that number 4, we're moving on to number 4. Let's say you find yourself in Israel, again, when all of this is over and we can travel again, and you find yourself in Israel for the celebration of Purim. Great, I think it would be a lot of fun to be in Israel for Purim. But if you were in Jerusalem for the celebration of Purim, you would actually celebrate a day later than everybody else. You would be celebrating on Adar 15, but everybody in Tel Aviv, on the other hand, still in Israel, but in Tel Aviv, would be celebrating traditionally on the Adar 14. Why? Why does Jerusalem push their celebration of Purim back a day to Adar 15? Because within cities that were walled cities, and this is going back to the time of Joshua, at the time of Joshua, walled cities celebrated Purim one day later than cities that were not walled, interestingly enough. So Israel being a relatively small country, and you know that it's not large, you could actually have 2 Purim celebrations in one. You could go to Tel Aviv and celebrate on 14 Adar and have a great time in Tel Aviv. And we'll talk a little bit more about celebrations in Tel Aviv a little bit later. And then you could hop in your car and you could go to Jerusalem, get to Jerusalem on Adar 15 and have a second Purim celebration. So if you absolutely love Purim, you absolutely like everything that goes with the Purim celebration, you have not had your fill of Hamantaschen yet, go and have a second Purim celebration, once in Tel Aviv, and then drive over to Jerusalem and have a second Purim celebration. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And I wonder if there are people in Israel who actually take advantage of the idea of two Purims, two holidays. Why not celebrate? In the world we're living in right now, celebration is a good thing. So why not have a second Purim celebration? So let's move on to interesting fact number 5. If we are wondering, what are we commanded to do? We all know that for our holidays, certain things are commanded. We know that we are commanded to hear the blowing of the shofar. It is important to us. It's part of our high holy days. Certain Shabbat commandments that we must keep. We are to light Shabbat candles. We are not to do work on Shabbat. It's supposed to be our once a week Jewish holiday. So what is the commandment of what we are to do for the celebration of Purim? Well, there's really only one. There's really only one commandment for the celebration of Purim, and that is to make certain that for our Purim celebration, we actually do hear the reading of the Megillah of Esther, which is why that is always incorporated, certainly, into synagogue celebrations of Purim, because that is the commandment. We must hear the reading of the Megillah of Esther. If we have done that, we have fulfilled the Purim commandment. Everything else, of course, is a lot of fun. We celebrate. There are those who say, well, Purim is a good excuse to imbibe a little bit in some wine or some cocktails. Surely, just make sure you're Ubering if you're not at home. Good idea. But if you've heard the reading of the Megillah, you have fulfilled the Purim commandment, and you're good to go. Let's go on to number 6. Interesting fact, number 6. We all know about Purim spiels. We all know that there are all kinds of parodies of the story of Esther. And Purim spiels are one of the most beloved parts of celebrating Purim. We all look forward to having some good laughs. We all look forward to some crazy costumes. How are we going to do the story? I have seen Purim spiels according to Motown, where all of the story is told using Motown music. I have seen Purim spiels according to the Beatles, where they're using the Beatles and their music to tell the story of Purim. One of my favorites was saw a congregation that did a Purim spiel according to the Beverly Hillbillies. Now, for those of you that are young and maybe don't remember the Beverly Hillbillies, the iconic situation comedy of the 1960s, you can kind of imagine this sort of, Granny and, Jethro and Ellie Mae and the telling of the Purim spiel in that kind, or the Purim story in that kind of setting. So people can get as creative as they want to with the story of Purim, but where did this tradition start? How did we get to the celebration of Purim and do these crazy, funny plays that are just sort of a fun way to make us laugh at this story? They actually date back to 18th century Eastern European Jewish communities. So that's where we have the tradition of the Purim spiel. So on one hand, it really is not an extremely old tradition, but that's where we go back. Eastern European, I would imagine that at that time, many Jews living in shtetls, anti-Semitism being what it was, that a chance to tell a silly, funny story was probably a very welcome break for the people. And so people began to concoct these sort of strange retellings and funny retellings of the Purim story. So that's where we go back for our Purim spiels today. There are people who make their living by writing fun Purim spiels, of course, then pay for it too. All right, number 7, talking about drinking, whether you're, an aficionado of wine or you're an aficionado of bourbon, what are you supposed to do? The question comes up, is drinking encouraged on Purim? Well, the answer is yes, and a little bit of no. So, it's kind of one of those equivocal answers. According to a great Babylonian scholar known as Riava, one is supposed to drink until you cannot tell any longer whether you are cursing Haman or you are blessing Mordecai. So you can't even tell the difference. Are you saying something bad? Are you saying something good? Are you delivering a curse? Are you delivering a blessing? Still others claim that you are to drink until you can no longer discern how many spots are showing on a pair of dice. So if you look at a pair of dice and it's snake eyes, you've had enough cocktails or enough wine. I don't know that it's snake eyes because I can't really tell. However, we are supposed to, according to the rabbis, enjoy and imbibe, but to moderation. To moderation. Don't go too far. And as I said, if you realize that you've had just one, a little over the limit, it's probably best to make sure you have a designated driver, or you're Ubering from synagogue or your Jewish community center or wherever you may be celebrating Purim at that point. So yes, enjoy your favorite bottle of wine, your favorite bourbon cocktail, or sipping whatever it is you like to sip, but we should do it with a bit of moderation. But this holiday is supposed to be about enjoyment. It's supposed to be about fun. It's supposed to be about having a good time. So let yourself have a good time. And we're living in a world where we need some good times. We need some fun. We need some levity, in our lives right now. So let's go for it. All right, interesting fact number 8. We all know that a big part of Purim, well, traditionally this year, again, not so much. I feel like I have to kind of qualify everything with the fact that we're in a pandemic here. We all know that Purim festivals, Purim carnivals, and doing that with costumes that represent the story of Purim is a very, very big part of Purim celebrations. It's part of the way of getting our young people involved, of getting our children involved, religious school students and Hebrew school students and Jewish day school students could have a good time with Purim festivals and Purim carnivals. So where did that start? Well, that is believed actually to have come from our Christian neighbors. In Italy, if you have ever been to Italy in sort of the pre-Lenten days, or you have been to Mardi Gras right here in the United States, you know that in Christianity, Lent is a time when you are supposed to sort of deny yourself something, like give up chocolate or give up baked goods or give up wine or something like that. So in order to prepare for that, there would be these major pre-Lenten carnivals in Italy where people would make merry and dress up and go out on the streets, and they would last all night long. People would have a couple of glasses of wine and some good food. That was the inspiration for our Purim carnivals, because the two would actually on the calendar frequently come in close proximity. We just had last week, if you were paying attention, Christians had their Ash Wednesday. So just prior to that would have been Mardi Gras. Here we are coming upon Purim. So much like Hanukkah and Christmas sort of overlapping or being in very close proximity, we have this same sort of situation with Christianity getting ready for Lent with Ash Wednesday and their pre-carnivals for that. And here we've got Purim, and it comes in very close proximity. So we are kind of going back to 13th century Italy and these pre-Lenten carnivals that were so popular in Italy that gave the inspiration for Jews living in Italy to have their own carnivals for Purim. So, we borrow from our neighbors. We borrow from the people around us. If they're having a good idea and it looks like they're having a lot of fun, why don't we also borrow something and have a lot of fun at the same time? Nothing wrong with that. All right, interesting fact number 9. During Purim celebrations in the 5th century, and I found this one particularly interesting, one part of Purim celebrations back then that started to grow in popularity, at least for a short period of time, was they would also make Haman in effigy, and they would burn him. They would burn Haman in effigy. So they would construct, a Haman, put him up, string him up, and then they would burn him in effigy as part of their Purim celebrations. Sounds, kind of out there to me, a little bit maybe on the sort of bordering on the evil side, but this didn't last for very long. So why did they stop this burning of Haman in effigy? Why did they decide that this really probably wasn't a good idea? Well, talking about our Christian neighbors once again, Christian neighbors frequently saw this and then mistakenly thought that the effigy of Haman was Jesus. And because it angered them to see here are these Jews who are burning an effigy of Jesus. Well, we can't allow that to go on. We can't permit them to do something like that. So when it became obvious that this could lead to further difficulties, anti-Semitism, etc., that sort of fell by the wayside. We don't really want people getting angry. We don't want to anger our Christian neighbors. So let's just put the burning of Haman and effigy away and move on to other ways of celebrating Purim. So that's kind of an interesting idea as well. All right, interesting fact number 10, and then we'll be halfway through. Hopefully I'm not boring you too much. In the 13th century, we all know that when we go to synagogue and we hear the reading of the Megillah, as we are commanded to do, the story of Esther, we know that what happens when the name of Haman is said, we are supposed to blot it out. We have groggers, we can stamp our feet, we can clap our hands, we can boo, we can yell, we can scream. It's great fun for the children in the congregation because they can sort of let loose, but we can all let loose too. We all need, a chance to let loose. Nothing wrong with adults doing it as well. So where did that tradition come from? Where did it start, the idea of blotting out the name of Haman with all kinds of racket, with all kinds of noise? It actually came from the 13th century. There was a group of rabbis who were in Germany and in France. They called themselves Tosafists, and they decided that this would be a good way of blotting out the evil, evil Haman when we are listening to the story of Purim from the Megillah, or the story of Purim, and then the name of Haman coming up. So since the 13th century, this has become a tradition in synagogue readings of the Megillah. So whatever your favorite way is to make some noise when the name comes up, you are going in a long tradition of Jews who have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you're continuing an old tradition, and it's kind of fun to think that, that's part of where we are. We can have fun with this by just yelling and screaming a bit. All right, let's go on to fact number 11, Hamantaschen. Let's talk Hamantaschen. Hopefully maybe you've had some already, you haven't waited, you haven't denied yourself. Maybe you've baked some Hamantaschen or gone to your favorite bakery to get some Hamantaschen. It is the beloved pastry or the beloved cookie, if you will, of Purim. It's usually translated as Haman's pockets. That's what it means, because Taschen in Yiddish, as well as in German, does mean pocket. These actually are not that old of a tradition. They only date back to the early 20th century in Europe, is where we are dating Hamantaschen. So it's not that old. Poppy seed was the original filling of the Hamantaschen. But we know now the sky is the limit. Just before I got on, I hope I'm not telling any secrets here, just before I got on to do this little program for you, I saw that Orly Hankin put on Facebook a recipe or a reference to the fact that Rabbi Hankin made what are called boozy Hamantaschen. I immediately wrote back and said, must have this recipe. If you go look at your Facebook, it's got bourbon in the filling with chocolate. Then you make the dough for the Hamantaschen with Guinness, I believe it's Irish beer, and then you drizzle over the top this lovely drizzle made with Bailey's Irish cream. So they truly are boozy Hamantaschen. I hope she doesn't get mad at me for sharing that little bit, but I want to make those in the worst way, being a bourbon lover as I am. That's a far cry from poppy seed, but we could do modern. Right now, a current trend, if you've paid attention, are savory Hamantaschen, where you can put all kinds of savory fillings inside the dough, like you would make appetizers or canapes. I wanted to find out, though, what is the most popular flavor of Hamantaschen today. I wanted to be able to share with you if you are eating the favorite flavor in our current, right now, today, Hamantaschen flavors. Well, I'm going to tell you, I thought this would be really, really easy. Really, really easy. Will you deliver? Oh, Toby is asking if I will make a Hamantaschen delivery once I make the boozy one. Well, we could talk about that. First, got to make sure they come out well. I wouldn't want to deliver bad baked goods to anybody. But, let me see how they work out. I'll make them after Purim. If they're that good, can have post-Purim Hamantaschen. Yeah, we can do that. You know, I'm bound to determine I'm going to try this recipe. So I'll let you.
I would pick them up.
Well, you'll come pick them up. Okay, there you go. Well, once I make them, I'll be happy. I'll let Sunny know, and she can get the word out that they were delicious or they were a total flop. Sometimes when I bake, things do flop, but we'll see.
Well,
But
just for us, those who came to the program.
There you go. You are
Yeah.
You are first in line. You know, everybody else has to wait their turn. I get you. I understand that, and I'm right there with you. So what is the most popular flavor? Well, as I said, I thought this was going to be really easy. I would, look it up. I would find it. Oh no. So I'm going to give you 3 different sources and the 3 different sources and what they said. So when I went to My Jewish Learning, which is a site I love, and I'm sure a lot of you use My Jewish Learning, they have all kinds of great articles there. And of course, they have a lot of Hamantaschen recipes. So I said, but My Jewish Learning, what's the favorite flavor? Well, according to myjewishlearning.com, raspberry comes in at number 1, followed closely at number 2 by poppy seed, and number 3 by Nutella or chocolate Hamantaschen. So raspberry, poppy seed, Nutella, or chocolate. Great. Kosher.com, another site you can use. So when I went to kosher.com to check what they would say about Hamantaschen flavors, this was their top 3. They have apricot at number 1 flavor, which I like. That's good. And then it is followed number 2, chocolate. So chocolate seems to be pretty much a winner here. And then strawberry at number 3. I don't know that I've ever had a strawberry Hamantaschen. I have to be honest. I don't know why you couldn't use strawberry jelly or strawberry jam, but I just don't think I've ever actually had one. But it might be worth a try. And I decided, okay, I'm going to one more site. I thought I'm going to do 3 and see if there's any agreement. So then I went to BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed had an interesting article on Hamantaschen as well. Now, when I went to BuzzFeed, they actually had strawberry at number 1, interestingly enough. Chocolate again was number 2, so clearly chocolate is popular, and they had cherry at number 3. Go figure. So you've got it from My Jewish Learning, you've got it from kosher.com, and you've got it from BuzzFeed. The bottom line is eat the ones you like. Whatever is popular with you and your family and friends, those are the ones to make. However, I did find one thing that was sort of in common on all 3 sites. The one flavor that ranks toward the very bottom when it comes to Hamantaschen, and I have to say, I agree. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but I have to say the one that came either at the bottom or second from the bottom on all 3 lists, prune. Now, I know there are people who love prune, because I've said this to people. They said, oh, I love prune Hamantaschen, which is great, but apparently it's a relatively small number of people, at least in their survey, wherever they took their survey. So there you have it. Flavors that were popular, poor prune, ranking toward the bottom. But if you like it, make it and eat it anyway. It's your Hamantaschen. I made some last week that were fig, and I had never made fig Hamantaschen before. And they were delicious. I will do them again. They were really, really good. In fact, I have, and if anybody wants to email me here at Mikveh Israel, tim@mikvehisrael.org. It's very simple. That's my email. I have a simple hack recipe for basic Hamantaschen. If you can have 2 dozen Hamantaschen on your table in about an hour. It's a simplified, I actually got it from My Jewish Learning. I decided to try and make it. And it's a simplified Hamantaschen recipe. I'll be happy to email it to you if you would like, if you still would like to make it. Simple, easy, and they were good. They're really good. They're really good. All right, let's move on. I don't pretend to have a cooking show, by the way. So number 12, a 20th century addition to Purim celebrations, so we're moving here into our more modern area, is something called Ad Lo Yada. Ad Lo Yada. I had never heard of this, I will be honest. It was first celebrated in Tel Aviv in 1912, even before Israel was declared a state, a nation in 1948. They were celebrating this Ad Lo Yada festival in Tel Aviv. What it is, and you can kind of see a connection here, it's a very, very elaborate street parade that goes through the streets of Tel Aviv. It has floats, it has music, it has people in costume. Sounds kind of like Mardi Gras to me. If you've ever been, to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, but it is still something that is part of Tel Aviv's celebrations to the present day when they are going to celebrate Purim. So I thought that was interesting. Number 13, of course, this one you probably all know, but I thought it was important to reiterate it. We all know that the primary theme of Purim, our celebration of Purim, is, of course, the saving of the Jews. As often in history as people have wanted to annihilate us, to do away with us, do harm to us, this is another story where we are saved from the possibility of annihilation through Queen Esther. And so it just kind of goes in with so much else that we know of in Jewish history. Interesting fact number 14 about Queen Esther. It is believed, and maybe you've heard this one too, it is believed that Queen Esther was a vegetarian. She was a vegetarian. Now, why would they come to this conclusion that Queen Esther was a vegetarian? Well, remember, she is living in the king's court in Persia. How else was she going to keep the laws of kashrut? So in order to keep the laws of kashrut, she ate a vegetarian diet, and therefore she was not violating any of the kosher restrictions. Now, because of this belief that she was vegetarian, there are some cultures that when they celebrate Purim and they're going to sit down for their dinner, for their repast on Purim, they always include as part of their dinner beans and peas. Beans and peas. Now, I don't know how they fix them. I don't know if they mix them together. I really don't know. But they make that as part of their dinner on Purim to honor Queen Esther's supposed vegetarianism. So if you haven't figured out Purim dinner yet, you might want to throw some peas into the mix, some beans into the mix. I thought maybe somebody needs to develop a pea and bean hamantaschen. No, maybe not. That might be going just a step too far. Unless you could figure out a way to make it really interesting with some seasonings and savory. Za'atar can go a long way to make something taste good. If when I'm in doubt, throw some za'atar on it and I'm good with it. So I don't know, but a pea and bean hamantaschen could be the next big thing, and it could come right here out of Savannah. We could be on the cutting edge of hamantaschen. All right, number 15. I kind of like fact number 15. In 1945, as World War II is ending and the Allied troops are defeating, thank God, the Nazis, American Jewish soldiers, so those who were in the military, held a Purim service and Purim festivities inside a castle that they had just confiscated from Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. So here, this had been a Nazi stronghold, and now we have Jewish American military celebrating Purim. You gotta love it. You gotta love the fact that we've got American Jewish soldiers celebrating Purim in a castle that had belonged to the propaganda minister of the Nazi party. I particularly like the idea behind that one. Okay, number 16. During the 1991 Gulf War, of course, which was, Israel was right there in the thick of it, the most popular Purim costume in Israel that year was to dress up like the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF spokesperson who announced the Scud missile attacks. That became the #1 Purim costume that year. And instead of hamantaschen that year of the conflict, they were actually eating sadamantaschen. Sadamantaschen. So hamantaschen becomes sadamantaschen. Creative. You got to give them points for creativity. So if you want to do that in memory, have some sadamantaschen along with your hamantaschen. Whatever you call them, as long as they're good, who cares? Call them whatever you want. Number 17. If we were to call our Queen Esther by her Hebrew name, because the Esther is actually a name that is from the Persian language, if we were to call Queen Esther by her Hebrew name, we would be referring to her as Queen Hadassah. Queen Hadassah, because Hadassah is the Hebrew, which would be Esther in Persian. But we call her by her Persian name, I suppose, because the story is set in Persia among the diaspora Jews in Persia. So anyway, that's an interesting fact. Fact number 18, allegedly, and again, I don't know how they prove these things. I don't even know where they come up with these allegations, but they're fun. Allegedly, King Ahasuerus considered a grand total of 14 1,400 women. 1,400 women over a 4-year span of time. I mean, not all in one day. Over a 4-year span of time before finally selecting Esther to be his queen. So out of 1,400, that's pretty good. You think Esther came out on top of 1,400? I mean, he obviously was doing a lot of research in quotes perhaps, but research nonetheless. But yes, so out of 1,400 women, Queen Esther comes out on top, and we are ever grateful for that. Now, fact number 19, if you are in Israel and you work in an office, Purim is not a day where businesses are closed or school children have the day off, like the high holy days and Passover and things of that sort. Considered more of a minor holiday, so people do go to work, children go to school. So if you were working in an office building in Israel and it happens to be Purim, it's during the week, you better report to work in costume. You better make sure you've got a good costume on when you report to your office in Israel. Why? Because almost every office complex has a best costume contest for Purim. And you don't want to be on the losing side of that. And you will be forever, ever ridiculed by your office mates if you are the one person who comes to work that day not dressed up for Purim. And who knows? I don't know what kind of prizes they give out for these best costume contests, but perhaps you win a new car. I doubt it, but something nice, something interesting that you could take home with you. So make sure if you're in Israel, you've got a good costume figured out when you go to work, which would be kind of fun to see everybody, in the elevators and the office buildings or whatever, all dressed up already in Purim costumes for the celebration. Why not? And finally, my last little fact, and I guess it's kind of fitting that we're going to end here. Purim and COVID. Too bad we are in COVID. It is going to mean a much, much milder and quieter Purim celebration in Israel. There are not going to be street parades this year. There are not going to be school carnivals this year. All of that, of course, is being put on hold because of the pandemic. But as one writer that I found in an Israeli publication said, but let's look at the good side here. Because the pandemic interrupted, and if you think back to the beginning when we were on lockdown and how supply chains were being interrupted, you couldn't find things in your grocery stores, you still can't, things are in short supply even still, we still haven't completely recovered. He said the one good thing about the fact that there's not going to be big Purim celebrations in Israel this year is that Israel imports a number of their Purim costumes from companies in China. And because everything was closed down, there was going to actually be a costume shortage in Israel. So people would be vying to get whatever costumes were available. I would imagine that a good costume might go up in price because, supply and demand. So instead of, the Queen Esther costume being, $14.99 at your local store, it might be as much as, $75.99. That's a lot to pay for a costume, but you'll do what you have to do. So that was the one good side. Since we can't get the costume shipments coming in from China anyway, maybe it's a good thing that there's going to be much more subdued celebrations on the streets of Israel, the schools and whatever. So, and Israel is doing well in vaccinating, but I don't think they've lifted all the restrictions at this point. We're still working our way through it as well. So anyway, we're going to celebrate anyway. It's going to be a Purim in the pandemic, just as we have done all of our other holidays for the last year in pandemic mode, Zoom mode. Grateful that we have it. So however you're going to join your congregation and people and friends and relatives, make sure you lift a hamantashen or 2 or 3 or a dozen. Have a glass of wine or 2 or 3, not a dozen. I would not recommend a dozen of those. Maybe a sip of bourbon or your favorite libation cocktail. And if you don't drink, a good cup of coffee is always good with hamantashen too. I mean, an early morning with a good cup of coffee and a hamantashen, what's not to love about that as well. So anyway, I hope you learned some very interesting little tidbits and facts maybe that you didn't know about Purim. like all of our holidays and all of our celebrations, they're always a lot of fun, and it's always fun to learn little tidbits. I love learning things. I'm a trivia freak. So little trivia tidbits like this always make me smile. They always make me happy. And I hope I made you smile and made you happy as well. Thank you for being here.
Does
That
anybody
was
have
fun,
any
Tim.
questions?
No, but that was just fun. It was just really enjoyable to hear. And Tim, you have such a very energetic, enthusiastic, way of presenting. So I just wanted to tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish more people
Probably
here. They're missing
33
something fun.
30 years of teaching high school will do that.
Oh, there you go.
You have to develop that kind of, if you're not enthusiastic, you can't expect the student sitting in front of you to be enthusiastic. So yeah, I did a lot of crazy things when I was a teacher, and any of my former students will vouch for that.
Well, I'm glad we're the recipient of that training.
And glad you were here. And I hope everybody enjoyed it.
It was really a lot of fun, and I do make a lot of hamantaschen. And I will tell you, in my family, the order goes cherry for my son, apricot for my daughter, prune for my husband, Nutella for my sister.
Wow.
So, and only once in my life did I attempt to make mun from scratch. And it took me days to clean it off out of the pots, and I will never do it again. It it gets into everything, and it's disgusting. And even when I bake them over at the AA, we use a prepared mun, and it's still the messiest part of baking their hamantaschen. But I actually have a question that has to do with, that's a little more on the serious side.
Okay.
I just read yet another article about yeshiva boys get the drinking, the heavy drinking, even in high school level kids and the college level kids. And I think, especially as Reform Jews, with an emphasis on social action, it's so hard for me. And I know what the old time, reasons were for drinking and why they said that, and their lives were so terrible, and it was really a good way to let loose. But in this day and age, do we really still promote the drinking portion, or how do we handle that in the Reform and
I think I read the same article that you did. Was this in the foreword?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I read the same article that they were having issues with binge drinking, particularly among students in the yeshiva schools in New York and whatever. I think this is a case, as I said, having been a high school teacher, adults kind of need to set the example. And that's why I said, I think we can have fun, but I don't really think we should over-imbibe. We don't need to over-imbibe anymore. Like you said, we're living in different times now. And I do think it is those of us who are adults in the community, whether you're a teacher, whether you're, a spiritual leader, rabbi, cantor or something, or just an adult to your own kids and your grandkids and your nieces and nephews, it's our responsibility to be the one that sets the example. Kids will follow. They watch everything you do. They really do. And if you are setting a good example, like, okay, I'm going to have a glass of wine, or okay, I'm going to have my favorite cocktail, but you're not going to let yourself go overboard and go crazy, and open the dialogue too, and talk about it, because binge drinking is really very harmful to young people. And it's a real thing. And we know it happens on college campuses, et cetera. But when I read the very same article, I had never stopped to really think about this happening in the yeshivas and things of that sort. But as I said, I think we have to be the ones as adults who really do set the standard and set the example for the younger people.
I will tell you from my son's experience, I have a son that lives in Israel, and his kids all go to yeshivas, and they all come home for Purim, and the adult ones, meaning those that are 18, 19, 20 and up, they do drink, but they don't drink at all the rest of the year. I mean, zero. They eat the grape juice on Shabbos and holidays, no favorite cocktails. So with that kind of personal restraint, I don't see a problem with it. I don't understand any of it, but I don't understand any of it anyway.
And
but
hopefully
that's
they're doing
how that affects us.
Right.
With them, it doesn't seem to be a problem, because they have a lifestyle, and that lifestyle calls for a lot of drinking on Purim. That's just, like fasting on Yom Kippur. That's just the way. And I think they have a fast for Esther too, don't they?
Yes, it's today, actually.
Today is
Yeah, right. I know
How's your
that
fast
because
going, Aaron?
what my grandson called Dale and said we finished our fast for the day, and his wife went to hit a Megillah, and he had already heard the Megillah, and but that lifestyle, yeah, and especially in an American yeshiva, it can be terrible. But for Haredi religious people in Israel, most of them have these habits way, way well under control. So who knows?
If I recall, I was in Israel 2 summers ago with Mikvah Israel. Israel does Israel not have a legal drinking age, an established legal drinking age?
You mean for drinking?
Yes.
I don't know that they can go into a bar. I really don't know because my grandkids don't go to things like that.
Right.
But
It is 18.
Is it?
is it? I don't know. You would know,
It may
Sonny.
be
I don't know.
18, but I was in bars in Israel when I was 14.
Hey, I was in a bar
telling
in Georgia with a fake Georgia license when I was 13, and I looked like I was 9. But they didn't care as long as you had something to get them off the hook. They served you a drink. It was crazy.
Oh, we're all telling stories now. Okay.
Right, yeah.
It's Purim, it's allowed. And
Oh.
I think actually, and tell me if I'm right about this, but so the bris was today, and today was supposed to be a fast day. But if you go to a siyum or a simcha event, you're allowed to eat. Is that correct?
I believe so, that you would
The
have
Richmond bris was today, and
right.
I was thinking, oh, how convenient.
No, I think the simcha of the bris would override the fast of Esther,
Right.
so that you could have the celebration as is fitting for the new child.
I know brises don't get delayed for Shabbos, or I don't even think Yom Kippur. I think you have the bris if you can.
Right.
I have one Yom Kippur story. I have a grandnephew that was born on Yom Kippur. He's now 14, but during services, my niece went into labor, and my nephew walked to the hospital. She was taken away, but he walks to the hospital. He's wearing his kittel. And so he goes into the hospital and he's davening down the hall, and he kept getting stopped because people thought he was a doctor. Anyway, that's my one Yom Kippur story.
There you go. Doctor,
Appropriate for Purim too. So
That's funny. I'm going to sign off. I've got another meeting in a little bit.
Yeah.
This was lovely. Good to
take
see
care, Tim.
everybody.
Thank you so much for doing
Thank you.
this. Thank you,
Thank you,
Sonny.
Tim. I just wanted to remind everybody that this Sunday is our Purim in the parking lot. It's from 3:30 to 4:30. And also next week, we'll be having during Food for Thought, our film festival event, one of them. We'll be streaming and having a discussion for the movie Commandment 613. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. And Sonny, I'll see you this afternoon. Bye-bye, Tim.